And we have a very special message from Senator John Cornyn. He was unfortunately not able to join us today, like Rodney, which is unfortunate. So if you'll turn your attention to the video screens to the right and left of me for a brief message from Senator John Cornyn.
Hi, I'm Texas Senator John Cornyn. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in person today, but I appreciate your chairman and my friend, Rodney Anderson, for letting me say a few words. Under President Trump, the last few years have been the busiest and most successful during my time in the Senate. We've confirmed more than 150 new federal judges, including 20 right here in Texas, and 2 Supreme Court justices. We've rolled back Barack Obama's job-killing regulations, reformed our broken tax code, and restored our military readiness. But we can't keep this going if we surrender the White House and the Senate to Elizabeth Warren and Chuck Schumer. Democrats, as you know, have been trying to undo the 2016 election from the very day President Trump stepped into the Oval Office. They pinned their hopes on Bob Mueller, and when that didn't pan out, they had to find another way. Enter Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff, who are trying to impeach President Trump. And the liberals running against President Trump want to decriminalize illegal immigration, institute socialized medicine, and bankrupt Texas with the Green Raw Deal. That's why we need your help. Together we fought them off last year, and if we do our job again, we'll do it in 2020. Thank you again for all your hard work and support, and enjoy hearing from one of our party's brightest stars and someone I deeply admire, Ambassador Nikki Haley.
Thank you, Senator John Cornyn. At this time, I would like to introduce Rhonda Moreland, who has a special tribute. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. This weekend, I saw a post that we are just 1 month away from 2020, and this gentleman doesn't think that we're ready. Now, this was a Republican activist, so I know that he was referring to the infrastructure of the Republican Party, our army of Republicans. However, I beg to differ. Here in Dallas County, here in North Texas, we are ready. I saw, through helping out with this fabulous event, that the Dallas County Republican Party and the Park Cities Republican women have both the leadership and the strengthened membership for a successful 2020. We have Republican Club presidents, staff, donors, members, activists, all who are ready to take on the fight that we face in 2020. There was, however, one driving force missing during the preparation of this event. Our friend, our leader, our first woman to serve as Dallas County Chair, Missy Shorey. Missy would have loved this event. She was passionate about our strength as women and our unique ability to serve as leaders and influencers in our community. So many times when we were preparing for this event, we heard that, what would Missy do? We thought of that smile and charged forward. Missy challenged us under her leadership and continues to challenge us in her memory to take on 2020 and make sure that each and every one of us do everything in our power to keep Texas red. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you're being dropped some glasses at your tables, and I am going to, excuse me, ma'am. Hey, handsome, why don't you bring me a glass of that champagne over here? I'm going to have these men and women join me in a toast. Ladies and gentlemen, please raise your glasses and join me in a toast to Missy Shorey.
Thank you, Rhonda K. Moreland. That was a beautiful tribute to Missy. And yes, I've been channeling Missy for months. and we miss our dear friend, and her husband Mark is here today. Mark, would you please stand up? Thank you. I know she's up in heaven kind of directing things. At this time, I would like to recognize a member of the Park Cities Republican Women's Club and to announce an honor and an award called the Betty Marquis Award. And this is a service award that Park Cities Republican Women gives to an outstanding member who has gone above and beyond anything that's asked of her and volunteers for things that no one even thought about doing. And so this individual who is going to receive the award is a personal friend of mine. She's a board member. She stepped up to the plate many times on different things. She was my sounding board as president, and we talked about different issues. And one of the things that was part of her greatest accomplishments and the service that she provided to Park Cities Republican Women, but really to the Dallas County Republican Party, was the fact that she initiated a minority engagement and outreach opportunity for us as Park Cities Republican Women to be more engaging with the community, because ladies and gentlemen, we're all here in the fight together, and so our minority brothers and sisters really matter to the Republican Party, and we are an inclusive party. So at this time, I believe that Betty Marquis herself is here. Betty is a longtime member of Park Cities Republican Women. Betty, if you're in the audience, if you stand up. Here she is. She's over there to the right. Betty has been a member since 1986, and she's the trailblazer in our club and in the Park City and the Dallas County Republican Party. So now it gives me great pleasure to announce the award recipient. She will receive a beautiful Heron porcelain elephant, which she will receive later. And so Karen Wilson-Smith, would you please stand up? Karen's Vice President of Programs. Thank you, Karen. Woo! And so now we are on to the heart and soul of our program. In case you haven't noticed, there's a lot of girl power going on here. Sorry, Rodney. Maybe that was the reason why we weren't here. Anyway, I wanted to mention that we have a very special program planned today. So Ambassador Haley is going to deliver formal remarks, and then it'll be followed by a Q&A discussion on topical issues led by our own Jackie Deason. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Jackie and give you a little bit about her background and why she's uniquely qualified to be our moderator today. Jackie is the host of the Jackie Daily Show that airs on the Glenn Beck's The Blaze. Jackie's an attorney with extensive experience in energy, national security, and environmental matters. She served many years as legal counsel to various committees on Capitol Hill. She is a senior fellow at the Texas Public Policy Foundation in Austin, which is an incredible think tank. And so it is my pleasure to introduce Jackie. But before we do that, if you would turn your attention to the video screens to my right and left for a special message about Ambassador Haley and this Stand for America video. Thank you.
When South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley was sworn in, she became the state's first female governor.
Results are what I promised the people of South Carolina, and results is what I'm determined to give them.
Governor Nikki Haley says it is the single largest economic investment in the state's more than 200-year history.
Mercedes-Benz vans,
full manufacturing right here in Charleston County.
It is a great day in South Carolina.
$560 million invested, 1,700 jobs right here in Chester County. It's a great win. So the best part of what has happened over the past couple of years is watching all of these jobs not just go into cities, but go into rural South Carolina. Because if you can give a person a job, you take care of a family. And we watched a lot of families get taken care of over the past couple of years.
President-elect Trump has asked South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley to be his ambassador to the United Nations, and she's accepted. The daughter of Indian immigrants is considered a rising star in the Republican Party. Haley would be the first woman appointed to Trump's cabinet.
Our new ambassador to the United Nations is living proof of the promise of America.
For anyone that says you can't get anything done at the UN, they need to know there's a new sheriff in town.
There is a new U.S. UN. You are going to see a change in the way we do business. For those that don't have our back, we're taking names. For too long, the Human Rights Council has been a protector of human rights abusers and a cesspool of political bias. If, for any reason, North Korea attacks the United States or our allies, the U.S. will respond, period.
She's so tough and she's so consistent. And you just know you're not going to move her.
The Americans just said we want our embassy in the capital, and that capital is Jerusalem. America will put our embassy in Jerusalem. That is what the American people want us to do. And it is the right thing to do. No vote in the United Nations will make any difference on that. What we witnessed here today in the Security Council is an insult. It won't be forgotten.
Standing her ground, UN Ambassador Nikki Haley making it clear.
I will not shut up. Rather, I will respectfully speak some hard truths.
Haley shows us what American foreign policy looks like with the spine.
Some people say there's a little too much swagger. You know that.
I don't think it's swagger. I think it's passion. I am very passionate about defending the United States.
As Nikki said, the world is really respecting the United States again.
I didn't know that I would be elected into the legislature. I didn't know that I would be governor. I certainly never thought I would be UN ambassador. Even though I'm a private citizen now, I know I'm too young to stop fighting.
With all due respect, welcome UN Ambassador Nikki Haley.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's great to be here in Texas. You know, as governor of South Carolina, I would always refer to South Carolina as mini Texas, because I think we think so much alike. So it's great to be here. I've been out on the road promoting my book for about 3 weeks now. This book was a labor of love. It starts with love for my home state of South Carolina, and then covers my love for the people and the ideals that are America. It's a very personal book. It covers some events that were joyful and some that were very painful. Some were even too painful to remember and write about. But I've discovered that writing a book is kind of like therapy. You work through your emotions about events in your life. You put them into context, you understand them a little bit better, and if you're lucky, you come out better for it. The book is my story, which means it's a South Carolina story and an American story. I was born the child of Indian immigrants in the 1970s in Bamberg, South Carolina. I grew up a brown girl in a black and white world. My dad wore a turban. He still does to this day. My mom wore a sari. We were outsiders.
We stood out. There's a story when I was a little girl that has followed me all of my public life. When I was 4 and my sister was 8, our mother entered us in the We Miss Bamberg pageant. It was the thing you do if you had a little girl. Even then, in the late 1970s, the organizers crowned a black queen and a white queen. Needless to say, judging by our skin color, my sister and I were somewhere in between. The pageant organizers didn't know what to do with us, so they disqualified us and sent us home with a beach ball as a consolation prize. My mom asked the judge if I could just at least sing the song I had practiced so much on. Ready for this? It was, "This land is your land, this land is my land." I'm not making that up. But I consider myself lucky because that episode never defined me. Although I will be honest with you, I swore off pageants after that. I've been lucky because I've had a life that's given me a front row seat on what makes America exceptional. If you go around the world and see that people who are different are usually outsiders. But what was different about America, what was different about Bamberg, is that our differences didn't have to define us. My mother and father had come to a country where no one, not the government, not our neighbors, could determine our worth and our place in society. That was up to us. My parents knew we could be more in America, so we worked hard, and our community came to accept us. Our country gave us the opportunity to strive and succeed. It gave my dad the opportunity to teach at a college. It gave my mom the opportunity to open a business. It gave me the opportunity to become governor and U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. With All Due Respect is an optimistic book, but it's not rose-colored. I tell some difficult stories, as well as some very happy ones. The book begins with one of the darkest moments in my life, the day in 2015 when a man whose name I will never say murdered 9 people in a Charleston church. They were gathered in Bible study, and then he showed up. They saw him. The killer didn't look like them. He didn't act like them. But they didn't throw him out. They didn't call the police. Instead, they pulled up a chair and prayed with him for an hour. When they closed their eyes for that final prayer, he began to shoot. What I write about in the book is that the people of South Carolina showed what true strength and grace looks like in the face of tragedy. We didn't let the media and the activist groups hijack our grief for their political agendas. We listened to each other. We respected each other. At a time when racial grievance was tearing apart places like Ferguson and Baltimore, South Carolina was a model for the nation in respect and healing. That's a story of love. It's a story that needs to be heard so that the lives of those 9 people are remembered for their faith and goodness to the people around them. The last thing I expected was the chance to serve the United States at the UN. So when President-elect Trump's chief of staff, Reince Priebus, called me shortly after the 2016 elections, I was a bit surprised. I was at a Republican Governors Association meeting in Orlando when Reince called. I was about to become RGA's vice chair, but Reince said the president-elect wanted me to come to New York to talk about interviewing for Secretary of State. I said, I can't be Secretary of State. I'm a governor. I just got elected vice chair of the RGA. And Reince said, really, Nikki? Secretary of State or RGA vice chair? This is a tough call for you? He had a point. Still, I went up to New York and told President-elect Trump that I wasn't the right fit for Secretary of State. He had inherited messes from North Korea to Iran. He needed someone who didn't have a learning curve.
So I went back to South Carolina, and a few days later, Reince calls again, and he says, "Don't say anything, just listen. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations." I said, "Reince, I don't even know what the United Nations does. I just know everybody hates it." But I didn't say no. I have a rule about how I approach new opportunities in my life, and that is to push through the fear and uncertainty of a new challenge, to work hard and set myself up to succeed. Every time I've done that, I've come out stronger on the other side. My husband, Michael, also helped. He started Googling around, researching the United Nations. He said, "Nikki, I think you'd be really good at this." I decided I would keep my mind open about the job, but I would attach some conditions. That way, if the president didn't go along with them, I would be off the hook. I told the president I had been a governor. I didn't want to work for someone else. I wanted to work directly with him, so I asked for it to be a cabinet position. He said, "Done. What else?" I said, "Well, I love policy. I wanted to be in the room when decisions are made, so I would want a seat on the National Security Council." He said, "Done. What else?" Now I was getting nervous. I didn't expect him to agree to everything quite so easily. I told the president I wasn't going to be a wallflower or a talking head. I had to be able to say what I think. And he told me, "That's exactly why I want you to do this." In the end, we both lived up to our agreement. The president was true to his word from the first day to the last, and I stayed true to my heart. I spoke my mind. I fought for American interests and principles at the UN, even when I had to fight virtually alone. The greatest lesson I learned from my time at the UN wasn't about the world. It was about America. There is a growing tendency in our politics to see people who don't think like we do as not just wrong, but evil. But I've seen true evil. I traveled to places most Americans will never go, and I saw things most Americans will never see. When you've heard a South Sudanese refugee woman tell you about watching soldiers throw her baby into a fire, and when you know she was later forced to eat his flesh, when you've seen Venezuelan families walk in the blazing sun for hours to reach Colombia in order to receive the one meal they might have that day, when you've seen pictures of dead Syrian babies, blue and foaming at the mouth from exposure to chemical weapons, when you've negotiated with representatives of a Chinese regime that is building a surveillance state that would horrify Orwell, when you've seen and done these things, you see just how profound the gifts are that we have received as Americans. Venezuela was once a thriving democracy. It was once the wealthiest country in South America. But thanks to the socialism, corruption, and brutality of the government, it is now one of the poorest and least free countries in South America. Venezuelans dig through trash cans and slaughter zoo animals to feed their families. The Maduro regime jails and tortures political dissidents by the thousands. The average Venezuelan adult has lost 24 pounds. When you see that it's hard to get, when you've seen things like this, it's hard to get emotional about whether someone in America's speech is politically correct. The truth is, there are so many more things we have in common than there are things that separate us. Fighting for our values, free speech, freedom to worship, and the ability to determine our own destinies, that is what made my time at the United Nations a labor of love for America. Our values are our greatest foreign policy tools. All of us, especially the people in this room today, have an obligation to be advocates for the principles of freedom, human dignity, and free markets that have made America great. These are gifts. They are things to be grateful for and to preserve. because they won't preserve themselves. If you don't believe me, I invite you to spend a day in the United Nations Security Council. Some of its most powerful members not only don't share American values, they actively work to defeat them. We must always strive to be a better people and a more perfect union. We can always do better. We can always do more. But in the end, I wrote this book because there is one truth about our country that I believe with all of my heart. It's the one message I will never stop being a loud and proud ambassador for. And my message is this: even on our worst day, we are blessed to be Americans. Thank you. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.
Can you hear me? Excellent. All right. Thank you, President Lane Sullivan and the entire Dallas County Republican women, all of you for making this possible, and honored to be with you today, Ambassador Haley, and all of you. So many friends here in the crowd.
It's great to be in a room with a group of girlfriends, and we appreciate you fellas that decided to join us too, so thank you.
Quite a lot of guy friends too in the crowd, yes. So Ambassador Haley, you have joked in your book, which I read yesterday, that growing up the child of immigrants from India in rural South Carolina prepared you for being a Republican in New York at the United Nations. I can imagine. So many people didn't know you're the child of immigrants. How do you think that uniquely qualifies you for public service as opposed to the rest of the field you've had to compete against?
You know, I think that growing up in that small southern town, being the only Indian family, I remember coming home from the playground after being teased. And I would go to my mom and she would always say, your job is not to show them how you're different. Your job is to show them how you're similar. And it's amazing how that lesson on the playground played out throughout my life, whether it was in the corporate world, whether it was as governor or as ambassador, because when you're faced with a challenge, if you first talk about what you agree on, all of a sudden everybody lets their guard down. And then you can go on and tackle the challenge, and it gets you closer to a solution. So, you know, look, my parents reminded my brothers, my sister, and me every day how blessed we were to live in America. And they always said the best way to appreciate your blessings is to give back. And so I think between all of those lessons, it was a good way to learn how to deal with people that were different, but also acknowledge your own differences in a way that you communicate with people to find the similarities.
And early in your career, you decided to go from being a legislator to an executive. So from a deliberator to a decider, executives decide. Tell us about that transition.
Well, I first actually got involved in politics. I was an accountant in corporate sector and came back home to the family business. And I remember complaining with my mom and saying how hard it was to make $1 and how easy it was for government to take it. And my mom said, don't complain about it, do something about it. I did not know you weren't supposed to run against a 30-year incumbent in a primary. Truly, ignorance is bliss. All I knew was they had way too many lawyers at the State House and they needed one really good accountant. So once I got into the legislature, I threw myself into my work. And in South Carolina, most legislation was passed by a voice vote. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it. But one day, there was a piece of legislation that went across the desk that gave legislators pay raises. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, silence. The ayes have it. Yet to this day, you can't find one legislator that said they voted themselves a pay raise. So I got really upset, went to our Speaker of the House, and I said, this is why the people don't trust us. And the next day I filed a bill that said anything important enough to be debated on the floor of the House or the Senate is important enough to have a legislative vote on the record.
my speaker pulled me aside and he said, "Put the bill away. We don't need to have it. We will decide what the public needs to see and what they don't." And I remember going home to my husband saying, if I can't even get legislative votes on the record, what am I doing here? And he said, then fight. So I went around the state of South Carolina and said, did you know of all the bills passed in the House, only 8% are on the record? Did you know of all the bills passed in the Senate, only 1% was on the record? So if you didn't know how your House member voted 92% of the time, if you didn't know how your senator voted 99% of the time, how did you know who to vote for when you went to the polls? And the people of South Carolina were shocked. To put this all into perspective, my first year in office, I was chairman of the freshman class. My second year, I was majority whip. My third year, I was put on a powerful business committee. And my fourth year, I was subcommittee chair of banking. The year that I wouldn't put the bill away, they stripped me of everything. I could go to the well and no one would hear me speak. I could file a bill and no one would co-sponsor. So I ran for governor. And I'm proud to say that one of the first bills we signed into law is now in South Carolina. Anything debated on the floor of the House or the Senate requires a vote on the record, and we took it a step further. We do that on every section of the budget.
Very impressive. Just listening to you gives me PTSD for my time on Capitol Hill. This all sounds so familiar. Okay, so tell us about the first time that you met President Trump.
So it's interesting. I actually knew the president years prior. When I ran for governor the first time, after I won the primary for governor, I got this envelope in the mail. It had this great gold trim all around it. And there was a support check in there, and there was a note that said, "You're a winner." And so I got on the phone with him, and we talked, and we were acquaintances throughout the years. And then the 2016 primary came around. And if you remember, we had a lot of talent on that stage, 16 great people running for office. I put my name behind a different person, and it was at that point that the president tweeted, "Nikki Haley is an embarrassment to South Carolina." And I responded with a tweet that said, "Bless your heart." But basically after he won the primary, I put my support behind him and going into the general. So it was funny when he did call me to come meet with him to have that conversation about Secretary of State. As soon as I walked in, he goes, "Well, I guess your guy didn't win." He can't let anything go. That's just...
Okay, so let's move to the UN. We heard a little bit about the strategy book that you all put together, which is about anti-American aid-seeking and aid-receiving countries at the United Nations who vote against our interests. Explain what exactly was in these books and how did you use them?
So when I was at the United Nations, obviously it really is, I mean, working at the United Nations, you feel like every day you're putting on body armor. You know you're going to have a fight that day. You just don't know which country you're going to be fighting. Many of the countries resent the United States, are, you know, anti-American, but at the same time, they all want to be us. You know, they would talk to me about how they loved our freedom of speech, our freedom of worship, the way we were able to speak and do whatever we wanted, and our fate was in our own hands. So they were very appreciative of that. But it was tough because they would go and bash America, and then they'd turn around and have their hands out wanting aid. And so it was at that point I had my staff create this book. And the book basically listed every country, the percentage of times they voted with us, and how much aid we would give them as well. And I took this book and I took it to the president. He lost his mind. Like, he lost his mind. And what I told him was, we need to be smarter about how we give aid. We don't need to give for the sake of having friends. We don't need to give for the sake of giving. We only need to give to the countries who want to be a partner back with us. We don't need to be giving to countries that say they hate America. And the perfect example was Pakistan. We were giving $1 billion in aid, in military aid to Pakistan. And in return, they were harboring terrorists that were trying to kill our American soldiers. We don't give that $1 billion to Pakistan anymore. We are the most generous country in the world. We always will be. That's who Americans are at their core. When we see a group of people in need, we've always been there. And I don't think the aid should solely be on a UN vote, but that should be one of the things. We should start to be smarter about who we decide to help. And if they want to be a partner back, we should work with them. If they want to partner with another country, fine. They don't need our money to help do that.
Okay, if you're comfortable sharing, what are some of your behind-the-scenes stories at the UN that you think are the most interesting or exciting?
Well, there was the first high-level week, and high-level week at the United Nations is when 193 countries come together. They send their highest officials to the UN, and every head of state gives their speech on the world stage. And this was President Trump's first time giving his speech and coming for high-level week. And so I wanted everything to be perfect and ready for him, and I wanted to set him up to be successful. So we had great meetings lined up. He and I would, everybody always asks how I got out of the administration without a tweet. And the truth is, I was honestly just very truthful with him. If I saw him doing something right, I would praise him, I would rally, I would support in every way that he needed. And if I saw him making a wrong mistake, I would say, I think this is wrong. I think instead you should consider X. And he would always say, well, how do you see that playing out? And we would talk about it. And he was a really good listener. But during high-level week, he called me one Sunday morning and he said, okay, I just want to make sure you got my speech. And I said, I did. It's fantastic. And it was. And I said, but Mr. President, I just want to kind of prepare you for what you're walking into. The UN is a different place. I said, so when you give your speech, it's not going to be like a rally. I said, they're not going to clap for you, but don't take it personally. I said, I want you to think of it like church. I said, it's a serious place. Just think of it like church. He said, church, got it. He goes, but I want to ask you a question. And I said, what? And he said, I was thinking, what do you think if I refer to Kim as Little Rocket Man in the speech? I said, Mr. President, remember the part I said about church? He said, I know, but I tweeted it this morning and it really killed with my base. So we go in, that Tuesday morning, he had to give his speech, and we're sitting there. North Korean delegation is right in the front row, and all of a sudden, he says it. And everybody's looking at him, and they have their translator pieces in, right? And so all of a sudden, you just see them go. And then they started laughing. So then I'm having a meeting with the president of Uganda 2 or 3 hours later, and he says to me, he goes, so tell me, Ambassador, what are we going to do about this little rocket man? Before the week was over, everybody referred to Kim as Rocket Man by the time the week was over. So it's a good story about the president.
Wonder how many of the UN delegates know who Elton John is, especially the North Koreans. Probably not very many. Okay, so some people think North Korea is our biggest challenge, our biggest threat now. You were there when there was a lot of change in the relationship. Are you optimistic?
Well, going back to that time, when I got there, North Korea was testing long-range ballistic missiles literally every other weekend. We were having constant emergencies, Security Council meetings. If you had seen the intel, it wasn't just Japan and South Korea we were worried about. This got very close to home and was a threat to America, and so we needed to respond quickly to that. What we knew was any of the revenue coming into North Korea wasn't going to feed its people, it was going to feed its nuclear program. So if we could stop the revenue, we could slow down the production of the nuclear weapons that they had. And so I and my team quickly went into gear and were able to pass 3 sanctions packages that were the largest sanctions against any country in a generation. We cut off 90% of their trade, 30% of their oil, stopped their foreign labor program, and really brought them to the point that they had to come to the negotiating table. And I think if you look at what the president was able to do, just to have a conversation about denuclearizing was a great first step. The second step, and the second meeting that they had, Kim said, we'll denuclearize if you pull back all the sanctions. And the president had always said, we're not going to do what others before us have done, which was basically listen to North Korea's promises and have them go right back to what they were doing. And so I think the president was right to walk away and leave it. Now we have to see where it goes from there. The good news is we're not every other weekend dealing with a long-range ballistic test, but I also think it's important that we never cower to threats from any country. We don't need to do things based off of fear. We need to do things based off of strength. And so I think we stand our ground. And the best thing we can do with North Korea is to keep the rest of the world in line with those sanctions. As long as we keep them isolated, they will have to conform and do what's right. We can't let that weaken. That's the biggest thing we should do.
Okay, and also during your tenure, we withdrew from the UN Human Rights Council. That doesn't sound good. There was a lot of criticism in the press. Can you explain why that was the right thing to do?
Interestingly enough, it was a gut reaction right as we got into the administration was to get out of the Human Rights Council. And I went to the president and I said, can you hold on doing this and give me a chance to see if I can do something with it? And the reason was I didn't want the president to immediately announce he was getting out of the Human Rights Council for that reason, because it sounded bad. I said, let me make sure I fight to see if we can reform it. I communicate what it's about. And then if we get out, you will have the basis to have done it. And so we genuinely did try and see if we could make it better. The Human Rights Council is just, I'll give you an example of what it is. When Venezuela was having their major protests, and you saw thousands of people in the streets fighting for their freedom, I immediately went to the Security Council and said, we need to have an emergency session on Venezuela. And they came back to me and said, no, we don't do that here. The Security Council is only for issues of peace and security, which that was peace and security. They said, that's a human rights issue. You have to take that up with the Human Rights Council in Geneva. So I went to Geneva, and I wanted to have a session on Venezuela. They wouldn't let me have a session on Venezuela. Why? Because Venezuela sat on the council. So then we had a session outside of the council, and Venezuela is literally bullying our witnesses that are going to be speaking in that event. The problem with the Human Rights Council is all of the countries who are the worst human rights abusers have found that if they sit on the council, no one can ever call them out. And so the whole council are countries like Saudi Arabia, Cuba, Venezuela. They just elected Democratic Republic of Congo last year. I mean, it's a terrible council. So we made a point of really trying to reform it. So our team went through and talked to literally every country at the UN and said, look, you can't have a council where you allow human rights abusers because it loses all of its legitimacy. And so even our European friends said, you're right, it's an embarrassment, but none of them would fight with us on it. And finally, the Europeans came to us and said, you have to stay on the council because the United States is the last bit of hope we have for the council. And that was really the point where I said, we're getting off, because we didn't need to give credibility to a council that was a farce. And that's when I went to the president and I said, it's time to get out. And so we got out of the Human Rights Council because we don't need a council to fight for human rights. We can fight for human rights every day by using the power of our voice and actions. And so that's why we got out. And yes, does it have the title? Doesn't matter what a title is. It matters what actions come from that. And the Human Rights Council is the biggest joke there ever was.
Well, and don't they spend their time criticizing the United States and Israel?
They spend most of their time criticizing Israel, not North Korea, not Syria, not Iran, not Venezuela, but they will spend all of their time fighting Israel.
Okay, so I'm going to transition to a happier topic. Energy production in Texas and elsewhere. A lot of us here are involved in oil and gas production, and we hope that means that we don't have to deploy 500,000 Americans to the Middle East again to secure an energy supply. Remains to be seen. But when you were at the UN, did you find that the fact we're the #1 producer now gave us a bargaining chip on the world stage?
You know, people say that the president hasn't done enough against Russia. This was one of the main things that we did going against Russia, because Russia never wanted us to be energy independent. And the fact that we have become that has been huge, not just against them, but against so many other countries. But think about it. When they recently had the strike against the Saudi tanker just a few months ago, normally we would have seen gas prices go through the roof. Normally we would have all been nervous and anxious about it. We didn't see anything, because we are now getting so dominant when it comes to energy that we're not easily shaken by those things that happen in the world. And so when you look at that, when you look at what's happening in Venezuela and the fact that we're not shaken by what's happening in that area, all of that goes to show how good our production here is in the United States. It's why it's so important for this next presidential, because every Democrat candidate wants to stop fracking. None of them want us to be as energy independent as we are. And it's every reason to show that we have to continue to be strong. And Texas has been a star on that front.
So, in your opinion, right now, what is the biggest threat geopolitically facing the United States?
China. Hands down, China is the biggest threat. And the reason is you have to look at China's story. I mean, first of all, they are strengthening their military capability, which is a national security threat to us. They are investing all over the world in different countries for infrastructure. But the concerning part about this is if you were to take a map and look at where they were investing, that's one thing. Now take a map and look at the fact they're running up the debt so much, these countries aren't going to be able to pay it back. And we saw at the UN, they would go in and basically bully these countries into voting the way they wanted them to vote. But if they're running up this debt and the countries can't pay it back, now what if China goes and says, okay, then give us your port, or we want to put a military installation? Now look at that map, and it will send a chill up your spine. They have been stealing intellectual property for years. The United States was naive and thought that if we helped them get into the World Trade Organization, that they would become friends with the West. That was not the case. If anything, they started stealing the second they got in. The United States loses over $50 billion a year just in intellectual property theft. Then you look at the fact that they have these concentration camps now of over 1 million Uyghurs, Muslims, that they put in these camps. They make them change their name, change their religion, change the way they think. If any other country around the world was doing this, there would be mass chaos. But because it's China, no one's saying anything. And then you take it a step further. President Xi started a committee that he chairs that says any company that does business in China now has to cooperate with the Chinese military. So think about our tech companies. Think about all of your data. And think about now who has to work with the Chinese military on our data. For all of those reasons, that is why China is a country that we need to be very focused on. Doesn't mean we shouldn't trade with them, doesn't mean we shouldn't speak with them, but it does mean we should let them know we're on to them and we're not falling for anything that they try and pull on us going forward.
Okay, let's talk about your leadership style as a woman. I think many of us remember the episode in the press where you had to explain that you don't get confused, despite what Larry Kudlow might have said. Can you please explain, because this is chapter 10 of your book, you go into great detail about this, why this might be, this is under the heading Women's Leadership. Why is this a matter of women's leadership?
Well, I strongly believe that no one is ever going to defend and protect your integrity like you will. And if you see something that's happening, you have to fight for yourself. And we had a situation where we had a National Security Council meeting. The president and the National Security Council decided that we were going to put more sanctions on Russia. I had follow-up conversations with the president the next day. I only did Sunday shows when the White House would ask me to. And so the White House had asked me to do the Sunday shows that Sunday. And I was on Face the Nation and was talking about Russia. And I said, you will see Steven Mnuchin will come down with more sanctions on Russia if he hasn't already. Later that afternoon, my friend Steven Mnuchin, who I adore, calls me and says, we have a problem. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, the president changed his mind. He doesn't want to put sanctions on Russia. Now, the president has every right to change his mind. That's the president. He can do that up until the last bit. And I said, no problem, Stephen. Just go fix it. Tell them that he changed his mind, and we'll be fine. They come out with a statement. The White House comes out with a statement the next morning that doesn't say he changed his mind. They just kind of kick the can down the road a bit. All of the press is calling my office saying, why did you say it? There had to have been a reason you said it. They knew I didn't say things lightly, so if I put it out there, there was something to it. And so I called the chief of staff, I called the Secretary of State, I called Bolton, and I said, look, you know, the best thing is just go tell the truth. Say that the president changed his mind. He has every right to do that, and that he's going to put that off until a later time. And I said, but you guys have to fix this. They're not going to stop. The calls aren't going to stop. This is going to continue to get bigger, and it doesn't need to be. They all just listened, didn't say anything. Tuesday morning comes around, the press is on fire about it. And I called and I said, okay, you've got until 5 o'clock today. Either you fix it or I fix it. And trust me, you would rather fix it than me. So nothing happens, and then 4:45, Larry Kudlow goes out in front of the press, gets the question that we all knew he was going to get, and he says, well, I think Nikki just got momentarily confused. I happened to be in my office and the television was on and the 5 on Fox had just started. And I texted my friend Dana Perino and I said, can you call me? And so she called me and I said, I need you to put out a statement for me. And she said, okay, what do you want me to say? And I said, just one sentence. With all due respect, I don't get confused. And she said, that's it? I said, yep, I'll text it to you so you have it in print on your phone. And so she did. Not 5 minutes after she said it, Larry calls me and says, Nikki, I'm so sorry. You know I love you. Oh my gosh, I've got my tail between my legs. And I said, Larry, at what point do you say someone is confused? At what point do you say I am confused? He said, I know, I'm sorry, I'll make it up to you. And I said, you will make it up to me. You're going to go call the press and tell them that you were wrong. And you're going to go fix this. He goes, I can't do that. And I said, oh, you can and you will. And I said, you have to go fix this. And to his credit, he immediately called the reporter, he fixed it, and it was done. But the story behind that is, don't let anybody throw you under the bus. Stand up for yourself, fight for yourself.
So I didn't know until I read your book that you were a working mom in politics, but also your husband deployed while you were serving. Tell us about that.
My husband is in the military. He deployed to Afghanistan while I was governor. So I was a single mom, military spouse governor. And I remember, we did all this planning. You always plan on what you need and finances and everything else. And the first 3 months he was gone, one of the kids was crying every single day. And so it was trying to get them settled. And one morning I remember getting the kids ready for school, and I was getting my son out the door, and I had to get this tie on him because he had to be dressed for school that day, and I couldn't get the tie on. What makes it worse is it was a clip-on tie, so I couldn't get it on. So I go outside, and security's right there, and I called security over, and I said, Sydney, can you help me get this tie? I can't get the tie right. And so he got the tie, kissed my son's cheeks, sent him on his way, and I turn around to go open the door because it had shut, and I was locked out. So I'm sitting in my robe in the front of the governor's mansion, locked out, and I just know at any given time a TV crew is going to ride by. And I'm looking at the security cameras, nobody's paying attention, and all of a sudden the door swings open, and it's my daughter, and she goes, Mom, why are you outside in your robe? And I said, I got locked out. So she said, well, I have to get ready. I helped her get ready, got her out, went on social media, and I said, what not to do getting locked out of the house while getting your kids out the door. Didn't think anything of it. Get ready, go out. There's a different security agent. I get in the car, and he said, Governor, I'm sorry you had a tough morning. And I said, oh, did you see my social media post? He said, no, ma'am, it was on the news. And I look at my phone, and my press office is blowing me up saying, did you just tweet that you got locked out in your robe? And I said, yes, why? And he said, because the Charleston News wants the footage. And I was like, no. And so the next thing I know, the Today Show and Good Morning America and CNN, everybody's talking about me getting locked out of the house. And I get an email from my husband, and all it says is, really, Nikki? So, yes, but for any military spouses out there, it's a sacrifice on many levels.
I've received a signal. We've only got time for one more question. We know we have to do better with Republican suburban women and all suburban women. What are your thoughts on how to win them over to the Republican Party?
Well, look, I think that I have long thought that the Republican Party can do better. And the reason I think we can do better is we can't wait for people to come to us. We have to go to them. That's true for minorities. That's true for women. It's true for everyone. Don't wait for them to show up at a Republican meeting. Go places that are uncomfortable to go. Because when you go, you learn something. And you listen to them. But more importantly, and I know this because, the Indian American community, the Jewish community, most of them are Democrats. But if you talk to them, they really have very conservative views. And if you go get in front of them, they realize there's a whole lot in common. So we have to do better going and talking to them. Now, the other thing is getting more women to run for office. And if you look at the situation, the Democrats love to say that they have a lot of women, and they do. They're winning that fight. But that's not about a Republican or a Democrat woman. It's about women running. When I became governor in South Carolina, we were the lowest in the country on women elected officials. It wasn't that South Carolina was so hard on women, it's that women didn't run. And it's hard because you turn on the TV and you see how toxic it is. But if anybody can fight that toxicity, if anybody can get through that mess, it's a woman. And so we're 51% of the population. We need to see more women in office. And we need to make sure that we are engaging women as voters, because women are very protective about who they put their name behind, very protective about when they speak out on something, because we're smart. We protect ourselves in that way. We have to do it in a way that we're communicating better with women, that we make it more comfortable. If there's something they don't like, don't beat them up over the head for it. Talk to them about it and engage them. And that's the way that we'll win women at the end of the day.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you
Ambassador
so much.
Haley,
It's
we
been
are
a
out
pleasure.
of time. I know President Lane Sullivan,
Okay.
yes, has joined us for a special presentation.
Thank you, ladies, so much for that engaging conversation. Don't leave. The ambassador has a special request of us, but I also want to give you two very special gifts. And one commemorates the Keep Texas Red theme, and as we would like to make you an honorary Texan. So why don't you pull those out and show everybody what those are. These boots are made for walking. Yeah, so when you return to Texas the next time, you can wear your boots. And then this one is from Representative Morgan Meyer, State Representative Morgan Meyer. This is the Texas flag that flew over the Capitol. And it has a very special message in there for you from Morgan Meyer. And on behalf of the Republican Party of Dallas and Park City's Republican Women, thank you. Jackie, I have a gift for you too. Thank you, ladies, very much. Okay, now, since you all are standing, this is perfect. Ambassador Haley would like a selfie. So everybody grab your book and hold it up, and we're going to grab our books and we're going to take a selfie, and then you all will have a memento of today's activity. So where's our photographer? Okay.
iPhone, hang on. Oh, got a wide shot. There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ladies.